The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then held a sickly yellow. Ruth's fingers tightened on the armrest as the captain's voice cut through the intercom, flat and wrong. "Systems are talking again. I need the woman in 14C. Before you watch the full story, comment below. Which country are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might be even bigger." Ruth sat in 14C with a paperback open on her lap and a small brass library stamp tucked into the side pocket of her cardigan. She was the sort of woman people looked past. 63, soft cardigan, silver hair pinned neat, the quiet librarian from the branch near the old airfield. The flight attendant had already leaned past her twice to speak to the businessman in 14A, offering him an extra pillow with a smile that never reached the older woman beside him. "Just the usual," the attendant had said when Ruth asked for water. The words polite and empty, the way people speak to someone who will not matter. Ruth's hand brushed the brass stamp. For a second, the cabin dissolved into the smell of jet fuel and the low hum of a hangar at night. She heard her father's voice from 30 years earlier, the same quiet certainty. "The systems always talk if you know how to listen." She had listened, then. She had listened until the day she walked away from the flight deck and into the library stacks, trading headsets for overdue notices. The plane was a mid-size narrow body, 3 hours out of Denver, cruising at 37,000. The businessman in 14A kept checking his watch. Across the aisle, a young mother rocked a sleeping toddler. 2 rows forward, a pair of college kids filmed the clouds. The first officer's voice had been smooth when they left the gate. Everything felt ordinary, until the first wrong detail arrived. A faint, irregular click under the floor, like a relay deciding whether to hold. Ruth felt it in her ankles before anyone else seemed to notice. She closed the paperback. The click came again, sharper. Then the cabin lights dimmed for 3 full seconds, and the air conditioning sighed into silence. A low chime sounded from the cockpit. The flight attendant's smile vanished. She moved up the aisle with quick steps, speaking into her handset. The crack widened. The captain's voice returned, tighter now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a temporary systems anomaly. Please remain seated." The words were calm, but the tone had teeth. Outside the window, the left wing light stuttered. Inside, the overhead panels flickered in a pattern Ruth recognized from old technical manuals. Electrical bus isolation, partial hydraulic pressure loss, the kind of cascade that started small and ended in emergency checklists. Full emergency came 6 minutes later. The captain declared it cleanly. Dual electrical bus failure, backup generator unstable, flight controls degraded. Oxygen masks dropped with a soft plastic rattle. The cabin filled with the thin chemical smell of the generators. People began to murmur. The businessman in 14A swore under his breath. The young mother clutched her child. Ruth sat very still, the brass stamp cold against her palm. She faced the choice the way she had faced it once before, in a different cockpit on a different night. Reveal who she was, or stay the quiet librarian who had never left the ground. Her pulse beat once, hard, against the side of her throat. Stay with me here, because what happens next is the part nobody saw coming. Would you have stayed silent if the lives around you depended on a skill you had buried for decades? The first officer appeared in the aisle, face pale under the emergency lighting. Ruth stood. Her voice was steady, almost soft. "The isolation valve on the left bus is cycling. You need to force it open manually before the backup generator trips." He stared at her. "Ma'am, please sit down." The flight attendant stepped between them. "She's a passenger, library card and all." The words carried the same polite emptiness as before. Then the captain's voice came over the intercom, strained. "Whoever that is, get them off the channel." Ruth did not argue. She simply reached into the seat pocket, pulled out the small flashlight she always carried for late nights in the stacks, and aimed it at the access panel beneath the forward bulkhead. "Watch the indicator light," she said. 3 flashes means the valve is still closed. 2 means it's fighting. 1 means it heard you. The first officer hesitated, then knelt. The light flashed 3 times. He forced the valve. 2 flashes. Then 1. The cabin light steadied for a heartbeat. The captain's voice returned, quieter. "Who the hell is that?" Ruth's brass stamp had slipped from her pocket during the exchange. It lay on the carpet, the tiny engraved library crest catching the emergency light. She picked it up, turned it once in her fingers, the way she used to turn a checklist, and slid it back into the cardigan. She moved forward when the captain ordered her to the jump seat. The cockpit smelled of warm electronics and sweat. The first officer briefed her in clipped sentences while the captain kept the aircraft level by feel. Ruth's hands found the overhead panel without looking. She spoke in the old rhythm, the one that lived in muscle more than memory. "Left generator control switch to on. Confirm voltage. Right side is reading 0. Isolate it. Cross-tie the essential bus. Hydraulic pump 3 is cycling. Leave it. We'll need the pressure later." The captain's shoulders dropped a fraction. "Your systems." "Was," she answered. A new fault light bloomed. Cabin pressure differential climbing. The masks were already down, but the outflow valve had stuck half open. Ruth felt the change in her ears before the warning tone sounded. She reached past the first officer, found the manual override, and held it. The valve fought her for 8 long seconds. Her knuckles whitened. Then it seated with a soft mechanical click. In the middle of the procedure, the young mother's voice floated up from the cabin, thin and frightened. Ruth paused just long enough to answer, not looking away from the panel. "She's going to be all right. Keep the mask on the little one first." The final sequence was slow and precise. Ruth called the steps. The first officer executed. The captain flew. When the backup generator finally locked online and the primary flight display returned, the cockpit exhaled as one body. Ruth's hands trembled once, then stilled. She looked at the brass stamp still in her pocket and heard her father's voice again, clear as the day he first said it. "The systems always talk if you know how to listen." The landing was hard, but true. Emergency vehicles lined the runway. When the doors opened, the first person to speak was the flight attendant who had dismissed her. She stood in the aisle, eyes wet, and simply said, "Thank you." The captain came back into the cabin after the passengers deplaned. He found Ruth still in 14C, the paperback closed on her lap. He held out his hand. "Captain Elias Mercer. I flew with people who talked the way you talk. I don't know your name, but I know what you did." Ruth shook his hand. The brass stamp rested between their palms for a second, warm now from her skin. 3 weeks later, the library smelled of dust and rain again. Ruth shelved returns the way she always had. At closing time, her niece, the only family who still visited, waited by the front desk. She held out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of the cockpit panel Ruth had worked, and a note from the airline's chief of systems. The isolation sequence she had forced was now part of the training syllabus. Her niece looked at the brass stamp still clipped to Ruth's cardigan. "You never told me." Ruth touched the crest with one finger. "Some things only speak when they have to." What would you have done if the person who saved the flight had been the quietest passenger on the plane? If this story moved you, hit subscribe. There's a new one waiting for you tomorrow. The brass stamp rested on the empty desk long after the lights went out, catching the last thin band of evening through the library window.